Okay, well, Gommaar, would you like to introduce yourself for the people who don't know you?
Of course, the people who don't know me. Hello, everyone. So I'm Gommaar Dulst. I am my whole life already. I'm actually, or at least since my the start of my academic career, I've been interested in exercise and how exercise affects human health and the muscle, like in particular. So I have been doing my master's and my PhD in Belgium at the Catholic University of Leuven, where I studied exercise physiology and the effect of low oxygen tension on muscle mass. So there I really learned the ins and outs of muscle growth and also muscle mass loss. The biological principles. And then I moved for my postdoc, so let's say my career after my PhD, I moved to Zurich, where I'm currently at now. And there I studied phenomena like muscle memory, so how the muscle, let's say, memorizes previous exercise, but also nutrient sensing. So how the muscle senses amino acids and how it uses these amino acids to grow. So everything related to muscle growth, I've been researching and I've been publishing about, and really in an academic ID. On the other hand, I'm also very interested in communicating evidence-based science, so related to exercise physiology, CrossFit, nutrition, and so on. So that's why I founded now 3 years ago, together with Henning Langer, the Instagram page WODScience, and that's how I could came in contact with John from the program, of course. To drive my passion to really communicate evidence-based science to the lay public, to the broader audience.
Yeah, I'm representing you today.
Yes. The old logo still, but it looks very.
I need a new T-shirt.
Yeah. We have some new T-shirts there. Yeah. It looks very good. Thanks.
And for those who don't know, my name is John Singleton. I am head coach of the program, and I suppose as a kind of summary for this talk, I like to put what Gommaar is studying into practice. You know, taking the evidence base and applying it in the real world to athletes to see if we can replicate those results and get results on the competition floor. And
Yes.
and I think we probably first met like maybe 4 or 5 years. 5 years ago, quite a while ago. I was in Zurich, and for me, it's always been extremely nice. You know, I've my background came from an evidence base during the studying, and it's surprisingly hard to find people who are able to connect that evidence base, which is relied on the science, and extrapolate that information into practical terms, because it's not that easy to do. I think combining the two worlds is actually more tricky than most people think.
Exactly. Luckily, exercise sciences lend themselves well to applying the science to the practice, right? If you're a physicist or something very, very specific, or a chemist, it's a bit more difficult.
Yes.
But exercise sciences and sports are always a little bit interrelated.
And so we decided to do this talk today for the latest program that we released.
Exactly.
And the program is in essence based on improving your conditioning.
Yes.
And what we wanted to do in the talk today was identify, we've posted this kind of any questions in the group. So we've got some questions from people who are currently following the program.
Yep.
But I think it's also to bring a bit more depth to why the program was started, and also give a general understanding of what is conditioning. You know, I think it's one of the terms that we use a lot. You know, I want to improve my conditioning. I want to get a better engine, but it's actually defining what that is. And then, you know, obviously we're going to try and hold it more back to our sport, which is CrossFit, make it related to the sport that we are doing.
Yeah.
So I think a question I would like to start with, Gommaar, from in a very basic point, you know, what is conditioning?
Yeah, it's a process of becoming physically fit by repetitive exercise. Of course, it doesn't say that much, but conditioning is actually improving the ability of your system to utilize oxygen. That's, let's say, the most important factors in conditioning. So you get the heart to pump more blood in a given time frame around the system, so around your body. You can transport more oxygen, and you can also, by the muscle, extract and utilize more oxygen. So this is basically the principle of getting better, in a better shape, endurance-wise, conditioning-wise.
And I think there's some key components there in terms of what actually is happening to the body when you get better at conditioning, in terms of the actual anatomical changes that we can see in the heart, and also the physiological changes as well.
So the heart is able to pump, contract stronger, so it can per pump out more blood. That's called the stroke volume. So for the same heart rate, you can actually have a higher cardiac output. That's why, for example, Chris Froome, an amazing endurance athlete, four-time winner of the Tour de France, I think, he actually has a maximal heart rate of like 145. It's not that much. That's also partly genetic, but it's also because he has such a large, let's say, heart to pump per given time frame a large amount of blood. Because of course, even though he only has a 145 maximal heart rate, he can actually pump around a lot of blood, much more than you and me. So it's not the maximal heart rate, it's more the stroke volume that is very important in endurance exercise.
And so then for the conditioning base, this is something that we would expect to see in well-conditioned athletes.
Yes.
And what about some of the physiological changes that we would see?
Yeah, so if you do, for example, a 6 from a relatively normal to untrained state, and you do 6 weeks of conditioning-based training, just like we present in our program, one of the first thing that will happen is an increase in plasma volume. That means actually that you will get more blood, at least the amount of water retention in the blood will be a little bit more. So in that case, you can pump around more blood. That's like one of after 1 or even 2 weeks, you see an enormous 10 to 15% rise in plasmatic volume. And then, of course, also after a while, you will increase the amount of red blood cells that are in the blood. So you increase your hematocrit value. This means that you can transport more blood around the system, and also transport more blood from the heart, from the lungs, towards your working muscles. So that's a more longer term effect, but this already will kick in after a couple of weeks, let's say 4 to 5 to 6 weeks. So that's the anatomical physiological effects. And then also on the heart, we said the heart will become stronger. It will hypertrophy. This means it will increase in mass slightly, so it can pump harder and more blood. And then the third thing will be at the level of the muscles. You will actually improve or increase the amount of enzymes and mitochondria in the muscle to extract and utilize the increased amount of blood that is coming from the heart. So it will improve your oxygen utilization rate during exercise. And therefore, you will use less oxygen, or you will be able to, that's maybe better to phrase it like this, you will be able to utilize more oxygen during high intensity training or exercise.
And how long do we expect those changes? You mentioned some of them can take weeks, but for example, for the growth of the heart, let's take kind of a subsection. Someone who's not, someone who's in their early 20s, can they expect to see an anatomical change in the heart that late on?
Yes, they can, but then you will probably need longer amount of training, or at least be already in a certain trained state, which most of our people in the program will be to some extent, right? the exact timing, I don't know about the anatomical changes of the heart. That's hard to say. Depends also really on the people, the condition, if they have chronic diseases and so on. But here we're speaking about weeks to months. This is not like the blood volume that really improves almost immediately when you start doing a training program.
Because you also, correct me if I'm wrong, but you will also get new capillary growth as well.
Yes,
to help.
Exactly. So you will be able to extract again more oxygen, because you will actually get more oxygen towards the inner parts of the muscle. Indeed, this is one of the main focuses actually of my lab, to see how the endothelial cells, so the capillaries, grow via exercise.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so in essence, this is because we're talking about conditioning now, and from a kind of exercise physiology point, when you start talking about conditioning, what kind of time frame are we talking about in terms of an actual workout?
Yes, I mean, they were speaking about, let's say, the two types of training, the initially well-researched, let's say, the continuous distance training. And here we're speaking about a certain threshold of intensity, which is relatively low to moderate for more than 30 minutes. So this is really the endurance type training, where you go out for a run, but you're still able to, or a bike ride, but you're still able to talk. So you really are in the aerobic zone, because your intensity is relatively low. And then you also have the more CrossFit based training styles. That is the high intensity, usually interval training, where you do bursts of high energy production, can be from 15 seconds to 4 to 5 minutes, interspersed with some rest, 1 to 5 minutes to 6 minutes. So really, and then you're speaking about the more anaerobic systems, energy production from anaerobic systems. But that's interesting, will also improve your metabolic conditioning on the aerobic side after a while. That is known now since 10 years or so.
And why do they, because just to clarify that, it's like, yes, if we're improving our kind of in this aerobic system, yes, but we're seeing a transfer over into that shorter time domain, more into the anaerobic system.
Yes.
And what is the reasoning behind that?
That it also improves oxidative aerobic conditioning, or
it has an effect for the anaerobic, is that right? In terms of it can have improvements through the anaerobic system as well.
Yeah. So why? I mean, there's some debate, but why high intensity interval training can also improve the oxidative, the aerobic system, is because, for example, the initial studies, what they did sprint interval training. So it's actually even more intense than high intensity interval training. What I mean with that is you do, for example, 30 seconds of all out on the bike, literally all out. You go as hard as you can. You rest 4 minutes, like relatively long, 5 minutes. You go again. And that you do 4 times. So in total, you only have 2 minutes of actual energy production, right? I mean, exercise energy production. So very, very, very short amount of exercise production. But still, if you see that, the first sprint, if you look at the systems that produce the energy, the first sprint will be approximately 60% anaerobic systems. Approximately, depends a bit on the study. But okay, 60 to 70%. But then, even when you rest for 4 to 5 minutes and you feel relatively fresh and you start again, it will increase the aerobic amount of energy production, will increase to 50, 60, even 70% after a couple of sprints. So even though you're doing really sprint interval training and also high intensity interval training, a large part of energy production is still aerobic, right? So you're really pushing the aerobic system together with the anaerobic system to the, let's say, the maximum. And that's why if you do this for a couple of weeks, you will also improve the aerobic system because you tax it so much.
And is the reverse also true, for example, that one thing that we will often hear in the CrossFit world is that if you are better aerobically conditioned, that actually your recovery is better between those higher intensity sprints as well?
Yeah, it's not so easy to find actual research data. It's more anecdotal, but it could make sense, right? Like it's hard to answer with scientific evidence here. I know it's a very overheard story, and everyone tells about this, and it's probably to some extent true. But you also have to think that the athletes in general, CrossFit or also endurance athletes, are just much better aerobically trained, right? So it's a chicken or the egg. Is it the aerobic system that improves the recovery, or is it just because they're so good athletes that they also can improve recovery? It's a bit hard to say, and it's not so easy to explain this from a physiological point, but it's probably to some extent true, yeah.
Because the one thing, so the often correlation we hear from athletes is, you know, say two athletes do a workout. One athlete feels that, you know, they just can't breathe. They can't keep pushing because it's their lungs. Yeah. Whereas the other athlete feels that they quickly go to some form of muscular failure. They feel like, you know, maybe they're not strong enough is the kind of common answer. Yeah. And are those two sensations quite well correlated? So an athlete feels that they're going through a workout and they're just really struggling to breathe. I mean, I'm sure everyone listening knows that sensation. You know, it feels like your lungs are on fire. You can't catch enough breath in order to keep pushing. Yeah. It is, in essence, that's what by improving their aerobic base, this is what they can improve, is that sensation of breathlessness. Yeah. Because it's always a little bit depending on the athlete, but what is also known, and what I didn't actually mention in the beginning, which is not entirely correct, you also improve the efficiency of breathing with aerobic exercise. Like, of course, if you breathe, the muscles that inhale and exhale the lungs have to work like at a high rate, and also there's a lot of energy going there. But if you do a lot of aerobic exercise, the energy, let's say you have 100% energy, right? 10% of that energy goes to purely breathing. With a lot of aerobic exercise, you can actually decrease this to, for example, 8% or 7%. So in that case, you get better in breathing, and more energy can go to the muscles and or oxygen in this case, can go to the muscles and to the working mechanical efficiency. So this could be improved with training for sure. And it will be mainly because of the mechanical efficiency that is not really on point there. So when we look to improve our conditioning from a practical standpoint, in essence, we're looking to be able to maintain the same speed for longer.
Exactly.
Would be a kind of a useful takeaway for people in terms of what they're looking to do. It's in essence being able to maintain a certain intensity for a longer period.
Yes. Do you want? I could maybe comment on that related to energy systems and lactate as well. Why this is?
Yeah, that'd be great. Have you got
I've got
something you prepared earlier?
I've got something I prepared earlier. Let me just share this real quick. So what you see here is this is an output or the data from a high level athlete, a CrossFit athlete that did a maximal exercise test on the bike. So what I mean with that is he started at a very low intensity. So now you know kind of what it is, 90 watts, which is very, very low for most people. And then every 3 minutes, the watts were increased by 30 watts. So the intensity, the speed, let's say, of the bike was increased until there was exhaustion. He could not push any further. The intensity was too high. And then we measured two things. We measured the heart rate, and you see it's almost linear. It goes linear with the increase in intensity that is known. But then you also see this exponential relationship, and that is the lactate. So the lactate is a byproduct of anaerobic glycolysis, meaning all the energy most of the energy at least, that is produced anaerobically has as a byproduct lactate. So you know the higher you go in intensity, the more anaerobic systems are working. So in this case, the more lactate you will produce. And that's also what you see. You see here the green zone. That is the pure aerobic base for this person, meaning that up until 240 watts, nearly all, let's say 95% of the energy production comes from aerobic energy production, and it also will feel relatively light for the person here. But then you have this middle zone where lactate is going up, but not exponentially. It goes linearly up. And then all of a sudden it really spikes up. And that is because the lactate production becomes much higher than the lactate oxidation, because you also get rid of lactate during exercise. So if you are trained, you will be able to shift this whole lactate curve, let's say, to the right. So the oxidative system will actually be better developed, and the whole lactate increase will start later. So you will be able to, for example, if he or she would train for a couple of months pure aerobically, the increase in lactate would only start here at 270 watts. So in this case, the intensity that he can hold for a longer period of time aerobically will be increased by conditioning. So yeah, that's one of the major points. So that the major point of training is actually to shifting this whole lactate curve that you see here to the right in order to be able to work more aerobically.
So I think this is an interesting move into to kind of the heart rate zone, considering we have it in front. And I think this is something that, maybe not widely debated in CrossFit, but definitely something that's something that interests me. So, majority with our athletes, we don't tend to use heart rate as a kind of a legitimate reference zone for training. We will either be based on like kind of the distance, using speed, or using the kind of rate of perceived exertion in order to measure where our athletes are.
Yes.
And I think that one of our reasons for doing this, I think that the relevance we tend to find is that it probably has more relevance in like solely monostructural sports or long distance sports where someone is just running, cycling, or rowing for a longer period, because the trouble in CrossFit is that we have so many different movements, so many different aspects of what we're doing, it's actually hard to get to correlates as you go through these zones. And I think it'd be interesting for you to want to know the background of heart rate training and this kind of working in different zones, and if you feel it can be applicable to CrossFit, or if you feel that there are other areas where athletes could be focusing on that would be more beneficial.
It's a good question, of course. So let's say the background comes, of course, from the endurance sports, as you just said. So what typically, for example, cyclists do, they come to a lab, they do this kind of test, and they know almost exactly at which watts their heart rate is, you see? So for example, if the coach says, okay, athlete X, you have to train in the zone 1, then he or she will look at, okay, I just have to train around 210 to 240 watts, which will be around 135 heart rate at a continuous pace. So for this person, it's quite interesting, right? Because they really can look at the zones and where the trainer wants the athlete to train in, just look at the heart rate, because it is linearly related to watts to intensity. But for a CrossFit athlete, it's usually, let's say, a workout 5 to 20 minutes, as hard as you can go physiologically, mostly, right? So you always are working in a 2 to 3, let's say, at the end of the 2 in the red zone. So in between the orange and the red zone. So you're always working at a very high lactate and also a very high zone, as hard as you can go. So for example, this is quite beautifully shown. This is from a study that measured how hard actually people go during a workout. So this is really CrossFit specific. And here you can see this is a rounds in an AMRAP where they had to do kettlebell swings and some running and some push-ups. And you can see initially they are low and then they go high. What is the y-axis here? This is the rate of respiratory exchange ratio, and this is a parameter to show how much glucose they are burning and in which, let's say, zone they are. The red zone is very closely related to this red zone, and you can see here that for sure they are working for the complete 15 minutes in the red zone. So if you would tell the person here, look at your heart rate during the workout, he or she will say, it's going to be high, 170, 90% of my maximal, or whatever, 85% of my maximal. There is not much more incentive you can give. The only way you can use heart rate for CrossFitters, in my opinion, is for longer monostructural pieces on an erg, where the coach asks the athlete, okay, now it's not CrossFit style, but it is more continuous, easy pace style, where they have to work in beginning of the orange or the yellow zone, or at the end of the green zone. You see, and then the coach can use, okay, now don't go above 145 heart rate. This is a possibility. But in workouts that are 12 minutes high intensity, there's not much use for a heart rate monitor.
So in essence, it's so that they can kind of limit their intensity through a workout. You know, a common thing in CrossFit is just to go hard. Whereas actually it's putting kind of a boundary in place that someone can say, you know, actually, we don't want you to push that hard this session. In order to ensure that, I want you to stay below this heart rate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But because of the linear correlation, they could also use the wattage in order to...
Yeah, exactly. They don't need a heart rate. So that's why what we do with the program, right? We don't have everyone buying a heart rate monitor. You just do a 20-minute test. You check out the watts, and then you use, for example, just for the people who follow the program, the 20-minute FTP test will be around, if you would use this as a blueprint, around in between the yellow and the red zone. So for this athlete, it would be around 325 watts for the maximal FTP test, around that number. So if we then use just 70% of that amount of watts, then you're like somewhere here for him, and that is then around the zone 1, what we want as a coach to train in this green zone. So you can perfectly also use watts, as you say.
And just to re-clarify that again, the training in the green zone, the concept is that we are improving the aerobic capacity. So the idea would be that green zone keeps expanding to get larger and larger as the wattage and the heart rate would increase.
Yes. So this is a CrossFit athlete. That means that he could actually go pretty high, although this was maybe not the best example, but pretty high in end lactate. This is around 13 to 14 millimolar of lactate at the end of the test, really near exhaustion. But if you would, for example, do the same, I don't have it here, for an endurance athlete, an Ironman triathlete or so, the green base would be much, much larger, would be much, much more to the right. And actually the spike in lactate would be only 6 or 5, because these people cannot go tap in their anaerobic systems. They have never trained it. They don't need it. They need a fast pace aerobically, because they have to work for 8 hours. So it really depends on how you train, and depends on the athlete. But a CrossFit athlete does not want a green base forever, because he or she really needs to be able to tap in anaerobic systems. They need to be able to produce lactate. Otherwise, you will always be lost in the fast events, and then you don't win competitions.
And I think this is something that we see with athletes who come in from an endurance background, that actually they find it extremely hard to reach intensity. Yeah. They find it very hard to push, because their body has adapted to this aerobic type of conditioning, and therefore it becomes very hard for them to access the more intense form of conditioning.
Yes, good point.
So in terms of like an ideal, if we would see an ideal graph for someone doing the FPT test, this is something that you would want to see, that you would ideally look to see, in terms of what we're looking at now, in terms of their lactate reaches a certain point, and we have a linear correlation with heart rate and wattage.
You mean what the goal would be after six training weeks, or? Yeah,
exactly, or things that that people could look for, that they possibly could start to improve on for this.
Yeah, so we of course build up the program. So initially this week, the first week, I mean, you won't probably see this video in the first week, but at least the initial weeks, we just slowly build up the percentages, meaning that the first training you do at 70% of the FTP, and then it really just goes up by time, 72, 75%. But the people should really look at it as it should feel approximately the same, although the watts going up, because you get better trained, your aerobic base get better. So even when the watts get higher, you will feel rate of perceived exertion will be similar. So that's where something they have to look out to. And then, of course, at the end of the 6 weeks, the goal will be to improve your FTP test, that you can produce more watts in 20 minutes. And this will definitely translate to CrossFit, because CrossFit, although it is at very high intensity, it is still a very large part is aerobic. Certainly most of the workouts, of course, not all, but most of the workouts. So if you can improve your aerobic capacity in general, you will also be able to do more reps in a faster time frame.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of a question to carry on from this, and this is a question that came from the group that I think is quite interesting, was the rest period of the more higher intensity work. Say, for example, we have within the program, we have, say, 4 minutes on and 4 minutes on at a kind of hard intense rate, and then 4 minutes off.
Yes.
Now, how much of a difference, kind of physiologically speaking, or from the evidence, would it be if we were to halve that rest period? So say, for example, the athlete would go 4 minutes hard, 4 minutes off, or 4 minutes hard, 2 minutes off. What kind of differences would we expect to see?
So let's say you do the first block of 4 minutes. You go hard. You go in the anaerobic system, meaning you go almost in the red zone or close to the red zone, or in the beginning of the red zone. Then you are working, let's say, in between here where my arrow is now. So you are working at a high pace. You are exclusively burning glucose, and a part is aerobic and a part is anaerobic. Then you rest 4 minutes. So you're almost entirely, let's say, rested. You will be able, because your body is rested, your heart rate is going down again, the lactate is flushed away, you will be able to do almost exactly the same intensity, right? Because you're rested, you can push the same watts and so on. If you rest less, 2 minutes, then you will have to decrease the pace a little bit, because of your lactate, and your complete system is not well recovered yet. So instead of working here, then you will have to work a little bit more to the right and produce a little bit more, less power. You see what I mean? So it really depends on the recovery of the athlete. Let's say he or she is not fully recovered after 2 minutes. This will increase the circulating lactate. It will increase the fatigue. It will increase the RPE. When the second bout is initiated, and it will tax the aerobic system even more. So yeah, I mean, there's not a huge amount of difference between the two training, of course, because you're doing a similar plan. But the most important thing to remember here is that you won't be able to fully recover if you only do a 2 minute rest period, which will also make the second one feel harder and also be harder for your system.
And I think this is probably one of the biggest aspects that you would see in a very well-trained CrossFit athlete. You know, there's the classic repeatability of 20 cows on the assault bike, and I think a lot of even kind of non-athletes would be able to achieve the first one extremely similar to the top athletes. However, as time goes on, the second one, they're not going to be able to reach that, the third and fourth, and that ability to recover, I think, is probably one of the greatest aspects of the CrossFit athletes, that they can recover after that high intensity piece so quickly. Maybe
one point here, and why maybe I can explain a little bit the physiology, why this could be, or why at least partially this is because the good athlete, or if you think about, if you do the first 4 minutes block, you will generate quite a bit of lactate. So your lactate goes up to 10, 15 millimolars, whatever. The great athlete who has a good oxidative system, meaning they have a good endurance capacity, they can actually use this lactate as energy. So lactate is always seen as a negative byproduct, but actually lactate itself, the molecule lactate, can be used by the slow twitch, so by the slow muscles from other muscles that are working, and use this as energy. It can be, let's say, pulled out of the system to be able to use as energy, and also by the liver. The lesser trained athlete related to endurance capacity won't be able to do this, and actually the lactate will just build up. At the end of the 4 minute or the 4 times 4, he or she will not be able to push the 4 minutes. So that is why CrossFit is incredibly important to also be able to utilize lactate and actually have a good aerobic system.
Yeah, and I think that's going back to the days of Mikko Salo with the lying on the back after a workout. May not be the he may be justified in his approach to walking around in order to metabolize the lactate.
Yes, exactly. Because if you work, maybe if people don't know, if you work at a very slow pace after a very high lactate producing bout of exercise, so for example, as you just say, easy spinning or just walking around, you will be able to flush out the lactate slightly faster than when you would just lay on your back. So it makes sense to. There was an open workout, right? Where there were 2 intervals. It might make sense to walk around in between those 2 intervals instead of just sitting on a bench, because the lactate will just be able, pile up.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's.
It's important. You can play around with it. You can play around with it.
I don't think people are too keen about moving too much during those in between the open workouts.
Slight movement, so walking around should be fine.
So I think if we kind of deviate now a little bit from a question that we commonly get, and a question not just about conditioning, although I think it's a lot easier to explain in a pure conditioning sense, but it's regarding warm-up.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I think there's lots of different ways that you can look at warm-up.
Yeah.
And, one of them is for CrossFit, say, for example, I'm going to be doing ring muscle-ups and squat cleans. Your warm-up's going to look very different to if you are sitting on a bike for 35 minutes. Those 2 things are, they need very different requirements.
So for sure, go ahead.
And I think one thing that's interesting is, as you said, I think the big thing about warm-up, especially in this conditioning sense, is more it's a perceived benefit rather than an actual benefit that we can see.
Exactly.
And so I think that'd be interesting to see, kind of like when we spoke about this a bit before, but some of the studies that have kind of shown the kind of effects of warm-up specifically for the type of conditioning workout that we are doing.
Yeah, the science about warm-up is not that straightforward, meaning that warm-up almost never show very strong positive effects on performance. You would think maybe the opposite, but really we looked a little bit for a post also into the literature related to that. And if you just talk about conditioning, so biking, running, and so on, if you would start cold, completely cold, or you would start warmed up, there's only minor differences in performance. So this is contrary to what many people believe. But of course, if you are doing technical movements such as ring muscle ups, you want to not only warm up the joints and the muscle, the intrinsic temperature of the muscle, but you also just want to warm up the whole system and also the motor control to doing those movements. But for us, this program, while it's purely monostructural, the warm up will definitely not be the most important part, and you don't have to spend 20 minutes warming up. Really, it's more about just a quick warm up and doing the training efficiently. Get off the bike in 20-25 minutes and just get on with your life. It's much more efficient than just warming up for 30 minutes. It doesn't have too much effect, at least on pure conditioning.
Yeah, and I think that's the takeaway. We are in essence speaking about the true conditioning here, and especially when it's one of the kind of longer distance, lower intensity pieces.
Then you can just literally hop on the bike. It does it's so low intensity, 200 watt, 120 watt for most women. You can just push this. This is no problem.
Yeah. And then, I think it's also a mental thing sometimes, maybe when we're doing the retesting of the FBT, to actually having that warm up to set your mindset to take yourself to where you want to be in those high intensity can really help as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things that I think we can go into as well, like some people wanted to speak about the machine setup and things like that in terms of setting up the erg setting up, be that the bike, ski row, and we have some things we can go into with that. I think one thing that certain people have spoken about, and this has come up quite a few times in CrossFit as well, but is about the kind of breathing considerations.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think a lot of people correlate kind of like the kind of rate of respiration with intensity. The quicker I'm breathing, the harder I'm pushing.
Usually correct. Usually relatively correct. Yeah.
And I think that one thing that could be interesting, okay, you've got the slide up now ahead of, and so I think this is a good thing, like to kind of look at like how we could use nasal breathing, mouth breathing to kind of monitor the intensity of the work.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm not really an expert in nasal and mouth breathing. I just can look at the literature, and also I'm not really doing it. But there's some studies showing that if you train nasal breathing, so if you really push people to train it, and really experience 5 to 6, 7, 8 months, there is a slight improvement in efficiency, in breathing efficiency. So this is what you see here is the ventilation VE divided by the oxygen uptake. So how much oxygen a certain movement costs. This was biking. And you can see that the nasal breathing improves slightly the efficiency. So you need per ventilation, you need less oxygen. So in this case, you actually improve the efficiency of the nasal breathing. So is there any way you can? It's quite some background noise.
Sorry, the classes have just started, so I think that
no worries. It's okay. I'll go through. So you see, trained nasal breathers, they could reduce their ventilation for a given amount of work by 22%. So that is okay. So they can improve their economy. So they need less energy to actually to actually do the movement. They improve their mechanical efficiency, but actually the performance itself, when they did a time trial, was not better. So it's a great way, as you say, to monitor your intensity. So if you don't want to go too hard, just do some nasal breathing. It's very hard to breathe very vividly via your nose. So this might be a good way to monitor your intensity.
So actually, I think one thing that might be good, Gommaar, is this might actually be a good place to kind of leave this video, kind of with the physiology, looking at the understanding behind it. And then actually what we can do is record a separate video for kind of the erg setup for different people and how we can use that. And then the people can keep those two things separate.
Of course.
Is there anything that you would like to, that you feel that's important that people know in regards to this type of training, kind of like insights that you feel a general population should know about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered most of the things, no?
Yeah, I do. I think there's some really good takeaways from there, and I think it's also that it's kind of important to know that if people have questions, they can reach out and ask. This is as you know, exercise physiology is something you've been studying all your life. There's like how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go with these questions?
Yeah, indeed, exactly. I think that's fine. I think you covered most of it. Let me just quickly check there was one thing what you said. Maybe from a physiology point of view is the fat utilization related to zone 1, then the green zone, and why this maybe is. This we could also, because there was some ideas about fat utilization, and maybe that's something we could explain as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful for people, because often people talk about like training in the fat zone. Like, what is that? How do I burning fats? I think it would be useful to people to have a bit of an understanding of that.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this we could also add here. I could explain this with this. Where is it? With one of these slides. With this slide, I could explain.
I think that would be. I think it's useful for people to understand kind of the because you had it in one of the slides as well about the energy systems that people using kind of one are going into utilizing carbohydrate source, one utilizing fat source, depending on where you are. Yeah. And that kind of like use of glycogen in essence, and where it shifts to using fat.
Yes. Yeah. I can explain this briefly.
I think if you do that now, I'll cut this part of the video.
Of course.
And then we'll kind of we'll merge it together.
Of course. If you can just ask the question then, and I will proceed.
How noisy is the background at the moment?
It's okay.
Okay, so I think one thing that could be interesting for people to understand is about, in essence, what we are utilizing in order to produce energy. We spoke a lot about kind of people are starting to understand more how important carbohydrates are for performance in CrossFit.
Yes.
But also this idea of utilizing fat. It was like the classic thing in training. You go into a normal gym, people are doing very low intensity work, saying I'm working in the fat zone. What is that, and how does that work?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a good question. So working in the fat zone. So as you can see here, you have, let's say, 4 energy systems. We talked about them already, where you have a very high producing creatine phosphate system. Then you have the glycolysis, where you produce energy via let's say, usage of glucose, in this case burning glucose and also using glucose, so pure let's say carbohydrates. And then if you go very long, if you have a very long time period, let's say a workout 1 hour and a half, 2 hours, very low intensity, you are burning to some extent fats, depending on the athlete level. So what people are doing when they are going very low intensity, they are working in this zone. So the aerobic lipolysis for energy production. You have to understand that you only have a certain amount of oxygen that gets into the muscle, and if you want to produce a lot of power, so a lot of energy per second, you need the more glucose-based systems, such as anaerobic aerobic glycolysis, because per amount of oxygen, per, let's say, unit of oxygen, you can produce more ATP. On the other hand, if you have plenty of oxygen, for example, during low intensity exercise, your heart rate is moderate, your breathing frequency is moderate, you have enough oxygen production, it makes sense for the body to actually produce energy via aerobic lipolysis. So this means that at lower intensities, you have like a spike in energy production via fats, so you will burn more fats, while when the energy increases, or energy production increases, you will have less contribution of fats and more contribution of the aerobic glycolysis over the burning down of glucose. So this is kind of what it is, and it just depends on the intensity. If you keep it at a low pace, you will rather burn the fats, or at least to some extent. And if you go harder, you will tend more to burn glycogen and glucose.
And in essence, the principle holds true for everyone, but the zone where that is will be very different for the individual person.
Yeah. So it depends entirely on how well the athlete is trained, right? So for example, this athlete is very well trained, so he will have a large portion of energy production in such a test via the oxidative lipolysis zone. So here the green zone will predominantly, not entirely, but predominantly be the fat production, or at least usage of fats for energy production. But then if you have an athlete whose lactate curve goes up almost vertically, he or she will have no fat production zone, and it will use almost immediately the more power producing zones such as glucose production. So utilization. So it really depends. The better endurance trained you are, the more, again, you shift this curve to the right, and the more, the longer you can utilize fat as an energy source compared to glucose. And this is important, for example, for endurance athletes that really are, you have approximately 2,000 to 2,500 calories as an energy tank via glycogen and glucose, so the sugars, 2,000 to 2,500 calories. While fats, you almost have unlimited. You can do like 40 marathons only on fats because you have 7 kilograms of fat, let's say, depending on which body type you have, times 9 calories. You can do the maths. It's 50,000 calories. You have a lot of calories to do a lot of exercise. So if you can spare your glycogen, spare your glucose for a longer period of time, you will be better as an endurance athlete in very long events. On the other hand, CrossFitters don't have to worry about this, or at least in most workouts, right? Because the amount of glucose that is, let's say, available in the tank, meaning in the liver and in the muscles, is more than sufficient to provide the energy for the 5 to 20 minute workouts they have. So it really depends on the athlete, why they need the fat burning zone and so on. So that's why most CrossFitters don't do the most of their training in the fat burning zone, because they really don't actually need it that much. It's more the anaerobic glycolysis they need.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's just an extremely important piece to note, that you know, one thing that we have found as well is spending lots of time in the kind of long distance, low intensity does not get the same transfer over as people would hope for.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah.
Okay. I think that's a good place to wrap things up for this show. And what we'll be doing, obviously, we'll be posting this in the group, sharing the link so people have access.
Yes.
And you know, I always love picking Gommaar's brain. So if people to ask them on part 2 of this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very interesting for many people. So why not? The power of internet,
so,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially during lockdown, you know. I've got to keep you busy somehow.
Yes, exactly.
But okay. Thank you very much for talking, Gommaar, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, speak soon. I'll send you the link or at least the show, and then we see.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye bye.
See you. Bye bye there.